2 days ago, we had Channel 12 in Israel reporting that if the United States doesn't attack Iran, they're going to attack Iran. And look at Israel today. They're in Gaza, they're in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, and at the same time, they want to attack Iran. Is that some sort of sign that they want to force the United States to stay in the region, or is it some sort of political posture on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu, because we know that he's facing new elections in Israel as well?
And both. I think it's both. I mean, Netanyahu, we know, has positioned himself as a security president. We also know that since October 7th, he has been expanding the scope and scale of Israel's military, combativeness with its neighbors, because he couldn't win in Gaza, so he had to expand the fight into Lebanon. Then he expanded into Syria. Now he's expanded into Iran, and he hasn't won any of those, by the way. None of them turned out the way they were supposed to. He may not win this election coming up, so he's in a political struggle for his life. What you didn't mention in all that, though, is what's going on here in the United States with the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, Section 219 for the House version, Section 1217, I think, for the Senate version, which basically, blurs the line between the United States and Israel when it comes to critical aspects of defense production, intelligence sharing, technology sharing, all of this. If this is passed, then the United States becomes virtually as one with Israel. And so, we now, the United States will be indirectly involved in everything you just mentioned, one way or another, policy-wise especially. So, this is, I think, is the strategy. I mean, this is literally, classic textbook examples of, the kind of parasite that takes over the host's body. I've written about it. I likened Israel to the green wasp and America to the American cockroach. And the green wasp lays its eggs in the American cockroach host. Then the larva takes over the cockroach, and the cockroach basically does what the larva tells it to do until the larva consumes it from the inside out. And I think this is what's happening right now, is that the Israeli parasite is implanting larvae into America, the larvae in the form of the National Defense Authorization Act, these two sections, which then will lead to further infections. We already see hints of it, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio is saying that if you ever spoke out against Israel, you will not get a visa to the United States. So he's basically making free speech a crime. And this is how Israel will survive, by taking over the American host.
But the continuation of the war, let's assume they're going to provide Israel with intelligence, with the weapons. The body, the physic is not there to fight all of these wars together. It needs something else. Does it mean that the United States is going to stay there forever?
Well, I mean, Israel gets a vote now. That's the sad thing, is that, we can't say, well, Israel, you don't matter. This is purely an American problem. Israel now gets a vote on what the posture is of the United States going forward. But let's make one thing perfectly clear. Israel does not have the capacity to take on Iran by itself. So it's an empty threat, straight up empty threat. Israel could only do this if the United States was engaged, and the United States can't be engaged anymore. Israel has not solved the air defense problem. I think the Iranians made it clear today that they, on the days of their highest missile expenditure during this war, they were producing more missiles than were being expended. That Iran is getting stronger as we speak, and the missiles they're producing now. And I wrote about this. I said, the Iranians. This war is is very much a laboratory for the Iranians. Everybody was talking about how it's a laboratory for the United States and Israel using advanced weaponry and all this stuff. That sword cuts both ways. What did we learn from our laboratory experience? That none of our weapons work the way they were designed to work. They all suck. What did the Iranians learn? That none of the American weapons work the way they were supposed to work. They suck, and how they can further defeat them. What the Iranians learned about ballistic missile defense is that it's very important to have missiles that can maneuver. And you're seeing increasingly maneuverable missiles coming out of Iranian factories now. And so today, the Iranians are building up quite a stockpile of advanced ballistic missiles that can evade all air defense options and bring significant harm to the places that they're targeting. This means that Israel has no ability to defend itself, and it's made even worse by the fact that the United States weapon shortage have put Israel at risk. Look at the commander of U.S. naval forces in the in Central Command. Basically said if the United States, the president, doesn't give him more destroyers of European problems, he'll have to pull destroyers off of the picket duty they're currently doing. A lot of people don't realize how important the American destroyers off the coast of Israel and what role they played in, what missiles that were intercepted were more than likely intercepted by these shipborne missiles. We're talking about pulling them off. It further weakens Israel. So the notion that that Israel can engage Iran and not be destroyed is ludicrous, and the Israelis know this. So I think Netanyahu right now is bluffing for the moment.
Do you feel that they're going to get something out of these negotiations between Israel and Lebanon? Because after all, if Israel continues the occupation in the southern part of Lebanon, in the southern part of Lebanon, sooner or later we're going to have a new fight happening between the two sides. I believe that if that happens, maybe Benjamin Netanyahu is just holding back because of the election. Maybe right after the election, whatever that would be, they're going to get back to the fight actively in the southern Lebanon. And in Gaza, the same is happening. The Gaza and the West Bank, you see, the war has never stopped there, despite having the ceasefire. But the point is southern Lebanon, Scott. To my understanding, the new head of the National Security Council in Iran, in his statement before he's coming to power, before he's being appointed as the head, it was an announcement, a statement by the security by that council. It mentioned that they're talking about all fronts: Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen. Iraq was part of that. I was surprised by Iraq. Why are they bringing Iraq in? But they're seeing all these parts of the acts of resistance together. And the new head of it just yesterday tweeted the same thing. What do you make of it?
Well, when Syria fell, when Assad fell, and Syria was recreated in the image of Al Qaeda. The Iranians admitted that this was a defeat for them, that it was a setback.
They said that.
Pardon?
They said that it was a defeat.
So what? 100%. It's a defeat. But they also said, at least some senior Iranians I talked to, they said, we've been in Syria for a long, long time, and we've established very good relationships at the local level. And the idea that the fall of Assad has severed the umbilical cord between Iran and Hezbollah is laughable. I think what we're seeing today is proof of that. First of all, it shows Lebanon Hezbollah had great sustainability despite all the casualties it took. It still has resources, but also the effectiveness of what Lebanon's doing right now, especially in drone warfare, I think is linked to relationships with the Quds Force of Iran, who are doing active resupply, using rat lines that that they know about, but nobody's interdicting. And therefore, the notion that Hezbollah is somehow going to wither on the vine, so to speak, is absurd. They're getting stronger. And they're doing harm to Israel, great harm to the Israeli forces. They can't be beaten by the Israelis. If they could have, Israel would have beaten them already. But Hezbollah is there. When you say Lebanon negotiating with Israel, I don't even think the Lebanese people agree with that anymore, because I think the current president of Lebanon is seen as a sellout, a man who, basically allowed the continued occupation of Lebanese territory by saying that it's not illegal if we support it. I believe he made that argument, which is laughable, and it actually empowered Hezbollah tremendously, because now many Lebanese who may be tired of the conflict are recognizing that the only way Lebanon survives as a sovereign state is to have politicians who, believe in the sovereignty of Lebanon. And I think Hezbollah falls into that category. So I think Hezbollah is actually gaining more and more political strength inside Lebanon than, the Israelis, the United States would like to see and like to believe.
Scott, let me change the gear to what's going on in Ukraine. Russians believe that the United States is involved in the war in Ukraine under the Trump administration. They're involved to the neck, and they're talking about the drones being used by Palantirs. They're using AI, they're using Starlink, all these connection, which we know it's all about making money. But when it comes to the intelligence, when it comes to military advisor, it's all about the United States providing the information to Ukrainians and Europeans. And this is the government that was supposed to put an end to the war in 24 hours. Right now, we are halfway through, Donald Trump's presidency, and he has done nothing. Basically, there is no active negotiation, nothing going on. And he says that the war has no impact on the United States. So that is not one of the priorities of the foreign policy of the United States. This is, where do you see the United States? Do you think that they're going to hand it over to the next president, the war in Ukraine? I would assume that the war between the United States and Iran would be handed to the next president of the United States, the way Joe Biden and his administration handled that, the war in Ukraine, and basically, giving that and hand it over to Donald Trump. Is that going to continue, the war in Ukraine, as we're witnessing in the West Asia? Israeli lobby, which is so powerful in the United States, they don't want to lose the battlefield. But how about Ukraine? What is happening in Ukraine in your eyes?
Well, I saw the report that the United States had resumed intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians. There was a report that we'd cut it off. But we've been playing games with intelligence support to Ukrainians for a long time now. We back when we provided the HIMARS missiles in I guess June of 2022, HIMARS cannot function unless there's targeting packages prepared by the United States. It's just the nature of the beast. They need to know exactly where the launcher is, exactly where the target is. That creates the known locations upon which GPS algorithms can be created. They get programmed into the missile, and then you set the inertial guidance system. You fire it. It's being guided to a specific spot on the ground using GPS, but the inertial is keeping it, but if it drifts, the GPS locates the drift, and it can strike a target within 10 meters of where it's aimed at. That's pretty good. That can't happen without the United States. At least it couldn't happen without the United States. But then the United States started playing games. First of all, the GPS stopped working. The Russians jammed the living crap out of it. And you don't have a Starlink option for HIMARS. So what the Ukrainians started doing is carrying out their own intelligence collection, and then creating their own targeting algorithms that could then be loaded into the HIMARS. So, they didn't have great safety, but the HIMARS isn't meant to be the weapon, the end-all weapon of everything. But it was a weapon where the intelligence support, meant something early on, but it stopped meaning something. Right now with drones, intelligence support is important. In taking apart the Russian air defense network, it allows Ukraine to shoot the seams in certain cases and get, do that deep strike, to get that one missile one drone to go through. But it's not a game changer. There's a recent report that came out. I don't know if you saw it, that went through since April, I think since April, the Ukrainian drone strikes against the Moscow region. And the number I think is like 1,400 drones were launched during this period of time. The vast majority of them were shot down before they got to the second air defense ring. Under 10% made it into the final air defense ring. And you know how many missiles how many drones burst the final defense ring to get inside Moscow? 1. That's a success rate, 1 in 1,400. When you're talking about an FP1 drone that's $55,000, it's just a prohibitively expensive way to go to war. And this is with U.S. intelligence support, targeting support. So the point I'm trying to make is that the U.S. intelligence is not a war-winning factor for the Iranians. And yet it's being sold as this is what we're doing.
Ukrainians.
Ukrainians, yeah. It's not a war-winning factor for the Ukrainians. They have come up with their own workarounds, all around. I mean, they use things, something called the Delta 16 as a communication system, but they don't have the real one. They have a workaround because nobody trusts the Ukrainians with the real thing. They only get a workaround. But even then it doesn't help them because, for instance, a key thing of Delta 16 is to make air defense systems work better, but they don't have any air defense. It also helps the F-16, feed into the overall battle. But if the F-16 tries to do that, it gets shot down. The United States has pretty much abandoned Ukraine. We do weird things like we give Turkey permission to resell old systems that don't work. The older ATACMS. Why is Turkey selling them? Because the expiration date's there, baby. They don't work. Yay, Iran, or yay, Ukraine. You get, world-class garbage. And yet everybody thinks that they're making it just a way of making the Turks make money. Instead of retiring the stuff and blowing it up, they're able to pawn it off on the Ukrainians and make some money. But it's not going to change anything. There is no game-changing technology out there. There's no game-changing, military force or posture that's going to change what's happening in Ukraine today. The United States has pretty much acknowledged that there's nothing they can do to help the Ukrainians win. They're not going to give them Patriot 3s. They're not going to give them licensing for Patriot 3s. They're not going to give them the ability to acquire, sensitive technology because nobody trusts the Ukrainians. Europe, a lot of talk, no action. I mean, the coalition of the willing is unwilling to, take Patriot missiles out of their stockpiles and send them to Ukraine because they fear the consequences of, being too weak. And if Russia turned their eyes on the Baltic, for instance. So, Ukraine has been abandoned by the Europeans as well. There's no magic bullet coming in. So, where do we stand on this conflict? Ukraine and Europe, and to a lesser extent, the United States, are pretty much operating on the reality that they can't win the war on the battlefield. They also know that over time, Ukraine is in an unsustainable posture from a social standpoint. I mean, this winter is going to be a black winter. And that means ice cold, no heat, no electricity, no gas, no food, no nothing. Life is unbelievable. And they know that's going to happen. Zelensky's all but admitted that's going to happen. There's nothing they can do to get themselves out of that picture. So what are they focused on right now? Because there's a hell of a lot of propaganda coming out of this conflict. I mean, one only has to log into social media, and Elon Musk's new algorithm just floods the zone with pro-Ukrainian propagandists who are just telling us how deadly effective the Ukrainian drone strikes are, how they're just making life hell on earth for the Russians in Kherson and Crimea. And these pro-Ukrainian resources then get picked up and echoed by other information. It's an information warfare that's taking place right now. And then that information is supposed to resonate and echo around inside Russia. And then it's supposed to engender a debate in Russia where people start to question whether or not Putin. And even if that's not really happening, there's people saying it is happening. And so people tend to believe that that's real. And then the Russians start to have their question, is it happening? Is it happening? The whole idea of mental warfare is to destroy a society from within. And this is the only thing that's going on right now. Everything else, the Ukrainians are getting slaughtered at the front. Their drone campaign is stalled. Yes, they can bring. They're terrorizing the Russians, but this isn't a war-winning strategy. The Ukrainians right now are going full, bore, full tilt until September 20th. September 20th is the parliamentary elections inside Russia. That's where Russia will vote for the State Duma. The goal here of the Ukrainians is to delegitimize the rule of Vladimir Putin, to make him look weak. You know, and I know there's people out there that are saying just that Putin's weak. They're saying that, that there's people questioning him now inside of Russia. People saying that maybe it's time for Putin to go. Well, this is exactly what mental warfare is supposed to do, is create this uncertainty. The bad news for the people who promulgate this nonsense, what's Putin's approval rate today? 76%. Well, he's in trouble, don't you think, Neil? Because no politician with 76% has ever prevailed in an election. It's never happened, right? And I can also tell you that by the time we get to September 20th, his percentage of support is probably going to be up over 80%, because all these campaigns that are going on haven't alienated the Russian people to Putin. They've rallied around it, and he's playing this very well. You saw he went to the Duma and pinned a couple medals on some people's chests, and then addressed. He said that guy said that we support you, Mr. President, but you need to be bolder. The president turned to the Duma and said, "Do I need to be bolder?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Really? I thought I was being bold. Do I need to be bolder?" "Yes." "All right, I hear you. I'm not going to be bolder. I'm going to be very careful in what I do, but I hear what you're saying, and don't worry, I got your back." And they said, "We love you, Vladimir Putin." You think that that's a Duma body that's at risk of being supplanted by what? Yabloko, the opposition party that just got banned from the election because they're a CIA-funded hack job? I mean, there's no political opposition, meaningful political opposition to Vladimir Putin. The parties that aren't part of United Russia are going to be vying over who's more pro-Putin going into this election. Because right now, the sentiment of Russia isn't, my God, we have to get out of this war. It's, my God, we have to win this war. And Putin has a winning strategy, and they're starting to recognize this. So, you saw what he did in Novosibirsk too. I mean, Novosibirsk, third largest city in Russia, largest growing economy, one of the most important cities in all of Russia. And Putin went there, and he's headed to the airport, and you have one of these crowds of people, supporters, getting ready to wave. It's spontaneous. This isn't pre-planned. It's there. And Putin, in Novosibirsk, which is, there was some, all is not well in Novosibirsk politically. Let's just put it that way. Putin stops his convoy, gets out, walks up with no pre-screening, and he's surrounded, mobbed by people. No concern whatsoever. Why? Because the man's loved. The man's loved. I mean, it's just crazy. So the idea that this strategy of creating a Moscow Maidan, because that's what they want. They want the Russian people to lose faith with their government and to rise up against the government and overthrow the government of Vladimir Putin. Sort of like the insanity of the American position: if you kill the supreme leader, Iran will fall. Here they have, if we can win, if we can force United Russia out of the parliament, we can create enough domestic political uncertainty that Vladimir Putin will fall. And when Vladimir Putin falls, everything else will fall into order, because Russia will break apart. We'll get our Boris Yeltsin 2.0 in place. We'll rise the oligarchs up. We'll rob the place blind, break it up into component parts. Everything will be good. And the Russian people will be good for that too. They'll be saying, that's what we want. We want to be broken up. We want to be weak. We want to return to the 90s. What kind of fool could ever believe that the Russian people would want this? The Russians know what happened in the 90s, and they never want to see that again. Are there Russians who would say, 25, 26 years of Putin, I'd like to see a new face? Sure, there's people that say that. But when you say, what new face? They're like, well, we don't know. And do you want to change horses in the middle of the war? No. We're sticking with the horses winning. So this is just crazy talk by people. There's no strategy here. It's going to fail. And the thing about building up these expectations for the political collapse, because this is, this, you see what they're saying online, that it's unsustainable, that Russian economy is going to fail. Wild berries is going to cause massive bankruptcy and collapse of the stock market and everything. It's just it's doom and gloom. It's done. And the people are against Putin, and they're starting to question Putin and gas lines. And oh my God, it's horrible. He's going to fall. And what happens on September 21st when United Russia's solidly in control, Putin's riding a wave of 84, 85% support? What happens to all the propagandists there? It collapses. It's like a bubble economy, but this is bubble propaganda. And when it collapses, there's nothing to sustain continued European and American support for Ukraine. And winter is coming. In winter, this will be a very black, dark, cold, disastrous winter for the Ukrainians. Zelensky admits it as much. He's done nothing to prepare for winter. And not only that, everything's getting worse because his decision to expand this conflict to wild berries to get the propaganda moment of burning warehouses with lots of flames and black smoke, it just proves that Russia's falling apart. It's backfired because Russia now is taking out the totality of Ukraine's distribution network. All the warehouses, the factories, everything is gone. And that's the end of their study. Andrei Elnitsky, who's the general who came up with mental warfare in 2021, further in 2023, continues to this day. He recently published an article where he said, all the people who are advocating for striking Europe, there's no need. Because now that Russia has taken the gloves off, there's 30 to 33 separate decision centers inside Ukraine, centers of gravity. And if they're struck, Ukraine collapses. It's over. And he said now it appears that Russia's putting all 33 in the mix. And I think that's where we're at right now. This is something that Russia militarily could have done 2 years ago, but they didn't. Why? Because war is an extension of politics by other means. You don't win wars only on the battlefield. If you do things on the battlefield that, for instance, cause the international community to say, "Hi, you're doing too much, man. It's unjustifiable. We can't support you. I'm sorry." China gets a little nervous about what's going on. No, you got to keep China. You got to keep India. You got to keep all these nations. You do that by being pragmatic and being practical, being measured, and not escalating. I mean, 2 years ago, could you imagine Russia shutting down all the Black Sea ports of Ukraine and not a peep from the world? Not a peep from the world. Not a peep from the world. And 2 years ago, they would have been screaming, Putin's trying to starve the world. Why? Because of this propaganda effort, these drone attacks. The world says, Russia, you kicked the bear. So don't complain now that the bear's come out of the den and he's smacking you with his paws. This is the reality that there's no support for Ukraine today. Russia is collapsing their economy. As I said, shutting down the Black Sea ports. 60% of the Ukrainian economy is going to die on the vine now. They can't get their grain to market, the whole thing. So it was a strategic mistake on the part of the Ukrainians and their Western allies to do this work, because what it did is it legitimized everything that Russia couldn't do 2 years ago. And now they can, politically, domestically as well. I mean, you don't want to create a situation where you breathe life into an opposition movement. And, Russia, even though there were people, I remember 2024, I went to the Donbass. I did a little tour through Novaya Russia. And I have to tell you,
I remember.
I remember the sentiment among the Russians. I wrote an article that was meant for the Russians as much as meant for the West, but it was like, these people believe in Russia, but they're asking where is Russia? There's a lot of people, because that was the same time frame that I was going to Novosibirsk, Ekaterinburg, Izhevsk, Kazan, etc. And it was a nation that wasn't fully at war. It was a nation where a lot of people were going, we don't like Bandera and we don't like NATO expansion, but did we really need this war? Did we really need to be at war with Ukraine? I mean, there was this. It wasn't a majority, but there was enough of that there that the last thing you want to do as the Russian government is do something that has them go, yeah, no, too much, man, too much, and suddenly you have a viable opposition. And so Putin had to play his hand very carefully. You had to maintain control on the battlefield without massive mobilization. He did the one-time shot of 300,000, but then by keeping public support in place, you get the 20, 30, 40,000 volunteers a month joining to keep the military expanding and growing. You have to play the economy so that you keep the commercial civilian economy functioning while keeping the defense. You can't rapidly transition over into defense industry because that'll cause a break. You have to keep the support of the world so that people not only are on your side diplomatically, but they are investing. One of the great signs of the victory of Vladimir Putin's strategy is what happened in St. Petersburg International Economic Forum this past June. $80 billion were invested into Russia during that time. This is while Russia is being attacked by drones. And one of the reasons why they were invested is because of the speech that Vladimir Putin gave at the plenary session, where he didn't mention the war once. He just talked about growth opportunities and stability. He mentioned the war during question and answer period, and he spoke about it very strongly. But the point is, Vladimir Putin has been a genius in how he's played this. And what he's done is by extending this war, not on his choice, but out of necessity, based upon the actions, he's put every single one of his opponents in a very, very tenuous position. All of the leaders of the coalition of the willing, Macron, what's his future? None. Starmer, we know what his future is, out, and an even weaker prime minister in who knows nothing about defense. Merz, I don't know if he keeps opening his mouth, he may not survive the vote of confidence, but he's gone. Alternative for AFD is just surging, 42% of Germans support AFD today. It's no longer a question of will they be in the government. It'll be a question of can they govern without the need to create a coalition if things keep going. So that's it. Meloni was the big hope. Well, she's under political pressure right now too to change her stance on Russia. Europe's falling apart. Economically, they got nothing. Militarily, they literally have nothing. They've got literally nothing going on. They can't build a military. The Germans, did that big, we're going to have the Fourth Reich, baby. We're going to rebuild our military, 800 billion euros. We're at 2030. We're ready to rock. We need 400,000 brave German men. We're going to send out letters to 300,000 men of draft age, and they're going to pour in. We've got everything in open. 532 responded. 532 out of nearly 300,000. The Germans ain't going to fight this war. No one's going to fight this war. Nobody wants to fight a war with Russia. This is the in the United States. We got nothing. I mean, if you remember 2022, 2023, when things were going bad, it was like Russia's going to nuke Kiev. Remember that? It was Western propaganda, but Russia. And how did the West respond? Because they're the ones who created the story. They wanted to say, look, if you nuke Kiev, we're not going to respond with nuclear weapons. No. We're coming in with overwhelming conventional military power. We're going to kick your ass with long-range standoff weapons, and we're going to shoot down all your missiles because we got PAC-3s, baby. We got THAAD. We got everything. We're awesome. We're wonderful. Chris Donahue even said last January that we can take Kaliningrad overnight because of our superiority. We're so awesome. And then we got our asses kicked by the Iranians, and we're out of ammunition. We're not that awesome after all. The United States has got nothing. We got nothing. We have to rechange our nuclear doctrine now. We come in early with tactical nuclear weapons because we got nothing. So from the Russian perspective, they're in the driver's seat. They just have to maintain. Don't do anything precipitous. There won't be any attack against Europe, but they pretty much have carte blanche to do whatever they want in Ukraine right now because Ukraine took it too far. It'll go down in history as one of the greatest strategic errors ever made. When they find the British intelligence officer who woke up one morning and said, I say, old chap, I think it's a good idea that we maybe open up the targeting of Wildberries. Wildberries is a Russian online retailer, but it's so important, $1.3 billion worth of industry. If we collapse it, the Russian economy will collapse and Putin will be gone, old chap. I think we should bomb And Zelensky went, okay, wait. Snort some Okay, wild berries. And then they did it. And the Russians went, why? It's not a military target. Russia didn't go crazy when they started hitting oil refineries. A lot of people thought they should. The Russians were like, well, we're bombing oil refineries. They bomb oil refineries. It's war.
You had the attack on nuclear bombers in Russia.
And Russia went, yeah, but these bombers were also dropping conventional weapons against them, so it's war. And the Russians, they're not insane. The Russians are very rational actors.
Exactly.
So they're like, it's war. We're not gonna overreact. Wild berries. Russia's like, screw you. Boom, 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 and it's over. It's over. The Russians are going all out now, and nobody's saying a damn thing. I want to know, where's that British intelligence officer? Has he been retired? I mean, because he shouldn't open his. Anybody who said, "I say, old chap, it's a good idea to strike wild berries today," I think it's a good thing. We should do it. You're out of here. Maybe it was the CIA. Who knows? Some tobacco chewing dude. Yeah, I think we should expand the target deck to include wild berries because the Russian economy is fragile. Because I'm an economic specialist, paramilitary operator, and I think we blow wild berries, Russia goes downhill real quick. No. All it did is piss the Russians off, and now they've expanded their targeting deck. I think it's a good idea if we start striking targets in the Sea of Azov and maybe expand it to the Caspian Sea as well to demonstrate Ukraine's strategic reach. And the Russians went, yeah, no, shut down the Black Sea. Nobody thought they would do it. What about the grain deal? The grain deal. Russia can't go against the grain deal. The grain deal is sacrosanct. Oh, my God, you can't go against the grain deal. There is no grain deal anymore. It's over. Finished. Done. The Ukrainians went too far. That's the thing that Russia was trying to avoid. Remember, I said before, the reason why Putin didn't overreact is because if you do certain things, you could create, a cohesion that brings together forces that are not cooperating, and they come in, and suddenly maybe Europe decides that they will send troops to Ukraine, that they will put a no-fly zone over Western Ukraine. They will do this, and that doesn't mean that the Russians lose, but it means it complicates the hell out of this war, which is the last thing Putin wanted. So Putin was very good, very good. It was the Ukrainians who committed the strategic error. God forbid they take down the Kerch Bridge. And they better pray that none of their drones ever gets through and strikes the Kremlin. But it doesn't matter. It's over for the Ukrainians right now. They're dying. People are talking about Russia's ability to launch over 200 missiles in an attack coming up. I don't know. I mean, the man who said it, Magyar, says he was misquoted. But we do know that the Russians have the ability to launch, 70. Maybe they can get to 100. Then you throw in, 500-600 drones. They can come at you with 1,000 things that can't be shot down because there is no air defense. And they can do that again and again and again and again. It's over.
Mm-hmm.